Hello, welcome to the Autocar podcast. My Week in Cars with Pryor here. Cropley over there. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, mate. How's it going?
Very well, very good. Where are we today, Steve?
Well, we're in an extraordinary place. We are in the office of Adrian Newey, very much F1 man of the moment, also known as the most successful and best F1 designer in history. 12 Constructors' Championships, 13 Drivers' Championships. Thanks so much for meeting us, Adrian. Welcome.
Thank you very much. No, it's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you.
That's good of you.
So it's Monday the 9th of September.
Yep.
There are things happening Tuesday the 10th.
Yes.
Steve, what's going on?
Well, as we sit here, Adrian is still Chief Technical Officer of Red Bull and will be for a bit longer.
Yeah, until through to 1st of March.
But tomorrow, in a press conference in the Aston Martin headquarters at Silverstone, you are going to be unveiled. They're going to kind of remove a sheet from you and
cloud of dry ice, and out I'll come.
That's it.
Yeah.
And you'll be similar position over there, or what, do you know?
Similar but slightly different. I mean, it's actually technical officer. I'm in this sort of slightly odd period of semi-garden leave at the moment, in as much as the last time I was involved with Formula One car here was up to and including the Suzuka race weekend at the end of April. Since then I've been out of Formula One, but have been concentrating my efforts on the RB17 track car.
Yes.
So I'll continue to be working on the 17 through until the 1st of March, and then the 2nd of March I will change my location.
Will you literally drive to a new place, or are you going to take some time off? Or?
Well, I'm taking a bit of time off at the moment because kind of over the last years my time split between Formula One and 17 has varied a little bit. The 17 project started in 21, but such was the intensity of 21 with trying to win the championship that year, and also the research and design for the big regulation change of 22 that didn't do very much work on it in 21. Got the guys going on some fundamental research primarily. It's kind of, whereas for instance last year then probably a third of my time was on the 17.
Oh, I see. Big question everybody wants to know: why Aston Martin? The scuttlebutt anyway is that you had your choice. You had some other choices. Why Aston Martin?
I mean, yes, it was very flattering that once I decided that I needed a new challenge. That multiple reasons for taking the very difficult decision to stop at Red Bull, because if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said no, I will be at Red Bull for the rest of my working career. But as I say, for various reasons, it just started to feel as if I was losing my mojo a little bit here on the Formula One side, and you know I'm in the very lucky position where I can have a very comfortable life financially without working again. So I'm in the lucky position I don't need to work for money. I work because I enjoy it, and because it's been my childhood dream to be doing what I'm doing. So I just felt if I stayed without my heart in it, I wouldn't be potentially be holding some of the guys here back, and B, I wouldn't be honest with myself. So
interesting.
I took as I say, the hard decision, because the easy thing would have just been to sit here and count the statistics, count the numbers, and say, another championship or win or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been. I didn't feel right doing that. So
I was wondering that one of the questions I wrote down here was that I wondered whether this was a matter of, to forget all the nonsense that's been floating about. This was simply a matter of clearing the decks and giving yourself a brand new, completely different challenge.
There's certainly an element of that. If I look back in my career, then kind of my move from Leyton House to Williams was in many ways forced, because Leyton House, the owner, was getting himself in a huge amount of financial trouble. Williams to McLaren was kind of because I felt I'd hit a bit of a glass ceiling at Williams, and then McLaren to Red Bull was primarily because similar feeling. I just felt as if I was going a little bit stale, and although we had a great year in 2005 with the car at McLaren, I was exactly the same feeling. I just felt as losing my mojo, my passion a little bit, and it's really that passion for work and for passion and enjoyment of chasing performance in racing cars. It's, as I mentioned, been my sort of ambition since
Delight, yeah.
10 or 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
And
how hard are you going to work? Because there's been a bit of a, when this is possibly the wrong thing to say, but there's been a bit of a suggestion here that you were, taking more of an overview and developing people rather than so on. And there were people in the front line who slightly suggested that they knew how to do it now. Are you going to be right in the middle of there? Is it going to be the sort of 12-hour days and all that stuff?
I think I will work as hard as I need to feel as if I'm properly kind of contributing to the research, design, development of the car. I mean, that's what I've always done.
Yeah.
I think as Red Bull became a mature organisation, then particularly under the stable regulations we've had since the big change for 22, then it is fair to say I've been less involved in the development of particularly this year's car than I was on the 22 car and then the 23 car. So, but a new challenge, a new team, then yes, of course, initially I'm sure I will need a lot of commitment. But as I say, I kind of, for me, it's the competitive spirit of trying to do the best job you can, and then after that you tailor according to the demands of that and the maturity of the team.
Yeah.
This team is now a very mature team. Aston Martin at the moment is, in terms of results at any rate, obviously got a little bit to go. The challenges are clear, just as joining Red Bull from the ashes of Jaguar was quite a
it's great
big.
in the book.
It was a brave move, probably stupid, but luckily enough it worked out. I think the key difference with Aston is that Lawrence's passion and commitment is exemplary, and it very much, in many ways, he reminds me of Dietrich Mateschitz, our late Red Bull owner. His commitment to the success of the team, and Lawrence, as I say, he's just so enthusiastic about everything and trying to get it to work that I'm excited by working with and for him to try to achieve the goals that we would both like to achieve. And one of those differences, I suppose, is that Lawrence has offered me a shareholding in the team, which, okay, you can argue again that's financial, but I think it's a different feeling when you kind of have a slice of the pie, if you like. So that's something that I've not had before, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that changes the outlook.
The commitment, I suppose.
Yeah.
Not that you weren't committed before, but
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Sorry, you asked the 26 rules.
rules. They're quite a big change, aren't they?
They're a huge change. I mean, I can't remember, it probably has happened at some time in the distant past, but I can't remember the last time we had completely new power unit and chassis regulations at the same time. And in reality, the power unit regulations, because there's a much longer lead time associated with power unit research than there is with chassis side, then the power unit regulations were fixed quite a few years ago, without, in truth, properly considering what chassis regulations were then needed to suit those PU regs. And so that's something which the FIA, with support from the teams, has been battling with since. How it will all work out is, in truth, still not clear.
Is it true to say that it's a lot more electric and a lot less downforce? Is that a
from the PU point, yes. So the original idea was that the FIA wanted was 400 kilowatts from the PU and 400 kilowatts from the hybrid side, the electric machine. They then started to realise that 400 from the electric was too much to be sustainable in terms of sustainable from lap to lap, so they reduced that to 350. But even now, there's still a lot of concern that actually the cars will be going significantly slower end of straight than they are at the start of straight because they've just run out of battery. It was a regulation that was brought in really, I think, primarily to try to keep the existing OEMs, the manufacturers, in, and hopefully attract new ones. And in that sense, you can argue it's been successful. Audi are coming in, Honda have reversed their decision to exit and are staying in. But what the show and the spectacle will be, I think it's a concern. But Formula One somehow it seems to have a habit of being all right on the night.
I was talking to Pat Simmons about you.
Mm-hmm.
He and I happened to be on a committee together, and he said, "Ask him what he would have done."
I would have done the opposite, to be perfectly honest. I think, well, first of all, the most important thing for Formula One is the individuality of the cars. So if the chassis regulations, which in particular, of course, means the aerodynamic regulations, become overly restrictive, then all the cars look the same. And if you look at other categories have gone one make, IndyCar perhaps being the worst example or the best example, then they went from a very successful series with many manufacturers in it, in kind of through to the mid-90s, to then going the one manufacturer route, Dallara. So when everybody runs the same car, and public interest waned.
Yeah.
You could argue to an extent that's also happened in sports cars at times. Sports cars now, they've found a way with the LMP1 class or the LMH class to which I think is actually very clever, which is to say, right, we'll put a torque sensor on the drive shafts, and the engine can't make over a certain power curve. We'll obviously put a minimum weight on, and we'll, perhaps most importantly, we will put a window in terms of drag and downforce that the car has to fit into in the wind tunnel, a common wind tunnel at Sauber, and off you go. It's a shame that they've now actually then fallen back into the balance of power,
yes,
balance of performance.
Yeah, if anybody gets it right.
Yeah, exactly, because it just feels like it's gone back to its bad old days of now. Whoever pays us the most for the circuit signage at Le Mans happens to win the race.
Oh.
But I think the principle's quite interesting, and it's well, LMH now is, in terms of the number of manufacturers involved, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that necessarily that prescribed aerodynamic performance is the route, but I would have done the opposite, in as much as I think first of all, there's a big question of, does Formula One need manufacturers, OEMs, in the sport or not? Because to me, the value is in the teams, not the manufacturers. Manufacturers come and go. They change CEOs who decided suddenly that actually they'd much rather sponsor a tennis tournament than Formula One. and they go off in a different direction, and that happens regularly. We've seen it. The teams themselves, that's their sole livelihood. So unless they get themselves into deep financial trouble, they're not going to go away. And from a spectator point of view, I'm not sure they're that worried about whether it's more fuel efficient or so on and so forth. I also feel, frankly, that the prescribed electric route, which most European governments have gone down, is not the right route. And they've done the typical governmental thing of not only, rather than saying this is the problem, which I totally agree with, we need to do something to help save the planet, to improve ecology, etc. Rather than say, right, this is the target, you guys, you OEMs, go away and come up with some proposals. They've said, this is what we want and this is what you will do. You'll now go fully electric. And don't get me wrong, I think electric definitely has its applications. It's a great technology. It's clearly developing fast. But to say that's the prescribed technology and that's all you can have, without allowing the manufacturers to go away and do the research to come up with alternatives, I don't agree with that.
It's very anti-engineer, isn't it?
It is very anti-engineer, and it's no means guaranteed that it's going to produce the right solution in all cases. It won't.
No, it won't. No, interesting. I was going to ask you about where you are with electric cars, road cars.
I think, in a short distance, etc., electric cars, makes perfect sense. So particularly city cars that like to remain in the city. But what everybody seems to be missing, particularly at a governmental level, is that actually, what matters is the birth and death of the car in terms of the carbon footprint associated with that, the carbon footprint of its lifespan, how long that lifespan is, and the regulations as they stand, that's not what they're prescribing. So what you really want is a car that's going to be very long-lived, and uses the minimum amount of energy that it can during its life, which means small, light and aerodynamically efficient. Yeah. Increasingly cars are just getting bigger and bigger. They're monsters now, aren't they? Let's face it. Car parks, nobody builds a multi-storey car park now. Simple reason, it's too expensive because of the weight they have to build.
Really?
Yeah, correct. There's a car park in New York that collapsed.
Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's you're now getting these 3-ton monsters instead of pushing for cars that should be weighing less than a ton. It's just all gone wrong.
We weigh cars, don't we? And we often find that they overshoot.
Quite a lot, some of them. Yeah. Do you have any in your new remit? Will you be involved in? I mean, you have an interest in hypercars, but will you have one going forward? Will you have an involvement going forward?
I thoroughly enjoyed the Valkyrie project. It didn't turn out quite the way we would have liked, in truth, for various reasons. I think I was hoping that there would be a great synergy between us as a Formula One team and Aston Martin, that we could sort of pull out the best of both of each other. In truth, it didn't work out that way, which is why in doing our second project, the 17, then it was determined that it should be a totally in-house project. And that's in no way criticism of Aston Martin at all. I think it's just that the realisation I came to is that we're very different industries that have very different ways of working, and it would have taken a lot longer than we had to properly marry those two together. Gordon Murray, who's I've a lot of respect for and is a good friend, he came to exactly the same conclusion when he tried to do the Mercedes SLR project at McLaren. It's just different. So I think I wouldn't want to get involved in another road car project with a race car team, if you like. Maybe it's the thing I've always felt I'd like to give back in a way is to try to be involved with an OEM trying to help to make cars more efficient. The general, your Fiesta type level cars. Haven't found the opportunity yet to do so where I feel comfortable as I'll be able to achieve that. I'm very good friends with Jim Farley, who's the Ford CEO, and maybe at some point in the distant future we can do something. But in the foreseeable future, then it's my work is all in going to Aston Martin. It's going to be I'm being employed by Lawrence to try to and becoming a partner with Lawrence in an attempt to try and make the Formula One team as competitive as we can. So that's very much a full-time, sole-focused job for the foreseeable future, as I say.
Will you have time to finish things on the 17th before you go?
Yeah, that's been one of the kind of, if you like, side benefits actually of stopping on the Formula One side or going into a period of garden leave on the Formula One side, is that it has allowed me to focus solely on 17 and to start to consider, because we're at that stage in the project, not just the design of the car, because we're out of the research age, we're now well into the design phase. But the phase after that, of course, is development, but also how you operate the cars, how you service them, the whole customer experience. And if the danger is which perhaps we fell into that trap with Valkyrie and with hindsight, is if you don't worry about those aspects until you've finished the design phase, then you may have made the car more difficult to service or more expensive to service and so forth than if you considered it at the research and design stage. So that's what we're now doing, is kind of trying to make sure that it's not only a great engineering product, but it's also a product which the customers can enjoy and won't find too expensive to run or too difficult to run, and will indeed have longevity, because cars like this, you want them to still be around and running in 25 years' time, really. So trying to choose suppliers that we believe will still be able to start to continue to supply those parts in 25 years is probably ambitious, but in the foreseeable future is important and become part of our remit.
Just talking about the efficient Adrian Newey affordable car, presumably that would go heavily on lightness, aerodynamic efficiency, and it goes right back to you and your dad in the Lotus Elan, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. I think the problem there is it needs a bit of incentive at government level, because at the moment, particularly the EU regulations, and I'm no expert on this, but I believe it's something that the German the big manufacturers in Germany insisted on, was the way the kind of CO2 credits the credit system and the battery side and so forth, then they wanted it to actually suit big heavy cars, the opposite of what the government should have been trying to do.
So they could charge a lot going in. Yeah.
Correct, because they saw that electric cars are going to be expensive, therefore the market's going to be in the luxury sector. So I think, and from the public point of view, I think also the sort of the drive for safety that has happened over the years, so this NCAP rating, which I think is vastly overplayed, it's just making cars heavy. The kind of people wanting SUVs so they sit tall and they feel safe and so on and so forth, and lots of space for the kids. I mean, I get it to a point, but it is driving these ever bigger, ever heavier cars.
Yeah.
So somehow we need to achieve a bit of a reversal of that trend, and that actually goes back to Pat Simmons' question to you. What would I have done with F1? If it had been totally my ball, then I would have gone the opposite route almost to what has happened. I would say, okay, first and foremost, Formula One is a sport. It's a spectacle. We rely on the income or the eyeballs and the spectators, eyeballs and television spectators at the circuit. So it has to be appealing. And what are the elements? It's variety, it's close racing, and it's noise.
Yeah.
And everybody harks back. Whenever a V10 runs at a circuit now as a demo, everybody comes out and everybody's hair stands on end.
Yeah.
But you hear the current breed of cars running, it's not so appealing. So I would go back to a small capacity high revving V10. No coincidence that that's what RB17 is. Much lighter. Put a small battery hybrid content into just to improve fuel efficiency a bit, but it doesn't need to be this sort of drive towards 50-50 that we've ended up with. Keep the cars light, keep them small, and concentrate on aerodynamic efficiency.
Just talking about aerodynamic, the other thing Pat Simmons said to me, it won't be news to you that he's an admirer of yours. He said, Adrian is like CFD before CFD. Computational fluid dynamics, so computerized aerodynamics.
Yeah, sure. Well, just to go back, but just to finish on that, then I think one thing Formula One has done over the years is popularise technologies.
Yeah.
So, when Formula One's or racing cars in general started to fit spoilers and concentrate on aerodynamics, and obviously they percolated into road cars. Carbon fibre, so whether it's real or fake, carbon fibre is now very popular. Flappy pedal gear change, whatever you want to call it, etc. There's lots of examples. And I think if Formula One had gone the small, light aerodynamic, well, I'm not saying they won't go aerodynamically efficient, but small and light in particular, maybe that would have helped to kind of rekindle interest from spectators in small and light.
Yeah.
But we haven't really done that at all.
No, they've got big, haven't they?
Well, I mean, there's an attempt. I think the FIA have belatedly recognised that cars have become very big and very heavy. So there's a big drive to try to make them a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter, but with a heavier power unit, it's not at all clear how we're going to make them lighter, because all the teams are already spending huge amounts to try and get them down to the weight limit. Most teams, I think, now have more or less got to the weight limit, but go back to 22, the first year of these rules, we were 20 kilos over for just about the whole season.
30?
20. Well, I think we were down to about 15 by the end of the season, but
it's a lot.
It's a huge amount. Yeah, I mean, you're giving away half a second straight away there.
When you say most teams, I always wonder how much somebody like you, knows about the others.
You hear snippets, but you never really know what to believe.
You don't discuss it, but you pick up stuff, do you?
You pick up a little bit. I mean, of course, the main IP transfer between teams is people moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose,
yeah. Occasionally you get somebody who's a bit loose-lipped, but generally speaking, it's from people moving.
Talking about your task, the going from here to move to Aston to start work. It seems to me that if you're doing some sort of semi-gardening leave, so-called, it's a little bit fatuous, that, isn't it? I mean, they can't stop you thinking, can they?
No, they can't. But they've blocked my tools.
I see.
So obviously, Aston want to do the best job they can in 25, but my main kind of focus will be the 26 regulations and this big change. Because say I start on 2nd of March. The aero rules come out, I think, 1st of January or whatever, might be the 2nd, whatever the working day is. So I'll already be kind of 2 months behind the curve. But in truth, of course, it's more than that, because not only will I be behind on the looking at those regulations compared to when they've come out. Because with the way the regulations have gone, you really need to be in front of a CAD system as well to be able to understand all the boxes and so forth that are prescribed. But also, it will be getting to know a new team, getting to know all the guys and girls there, and how we all work together.
Do you know some of them already? You must do.
A few of them I've worked with before. There's a few extra Bull people there, but most of them will be new.
Will it be a lot of recruiting? Will you kind of do an editing job, as it were?
I can't say. I mean, when I came to Red Bull, 2 people joined me from McLaren. It was only 2. The rest. What I prefer to do is I'm sure they're very good people at Aston. It's really trying to work with everybody and try to make sure that we get the best out of everybody, and that's really what happened at Red Bull. There wasn't a massive recruiting drive or anything like that. There wasn't a few people we had to let go. It was literally 3 or 4, but it was really about sort of trying to get the most out of everybody.
Do you see already, just knowing what you know about the cars of 26, do you already have areas that are in your head that might not be in other people's? You're famous for finding angles and ways and means. Do you find yourself thinking about that all the time, or drive to work?
Not yet. I mean, I know the only bit really is on the PU, because the PU regulations, as I say, have been out for quite some time, and because they're so complicated in terms of the relationship between the combustion engine and the electric machine, then how those work together is something that I can kind of think about a bit. But it will then be very much, okay, these are some thoughts.
Yeah.
Let's do the research, because it might be getting quite late by then.
Will there be, are we talking about a kind of accommodation problem, just putting all the stuff in the right place?
Packaging, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a packaging element, there always is, but again, the regulations prescribe most of this.
Do they?
Yeah.
Are they too prescriptive?
I think they are. I think the regulations have become too prescriptive. I think somewhere under that laptop there, I have a copy of the Formula 1 regulations from the mid-70s, and it's about 3 pages. I haven't got them now because I'm out of Formula 1, but the Formula 1 regulations currently are about that thick, and then there's a whole hidden kind of appendix, if you like, of all the technical directives that come out on top of that. So you've got this massive prescription of what you can and can't do, which is why ultimately, I think the 22 rules, when they came out, I was very very concerned that all the cars would look identical. In the end, there was a bit of slacking off of the prescriptive nature of the bodywork rules towards the end by the FIA under lobbying. And then once you got into it, there was actually far more wiggle room than I'd initially realised, or we had initially realised. So the bottom line is, when the cars came out in 22, they all actually look reasonably different to each other. They are, of course, now starting to converge a bit, which is natural. Third into a stable set of rules, then there's going to be an element of convergence. But yeah, I think variety is such a key thing, and particularly with the cost cap, one of the reasons for having that the FIA gave for having very restrictive regulations was to reduce the benefit of an arms race, to reduce the benefit of spending more. So it's the smaller teams, or the teams with less budget, could still compete. I think with the cost cap now well established, that argument really drops away, because as far as I know, all the teams are now at the cost cap, so nobody can spend any more. So I just don't see the need at that point to restrict the rules. The only one you could argue is that if you have a more open set of rules and one team reads it much better than the other, then you have a boring championship because that team runs away with it. But reality is that can happen. We had, once we got our car sorted out in 22, then we ran away, as we did obviously last year, with a relatively restricted set of regulations. So restrictive regulations don't guarantee a very even competition. What actually tends to guarantee an even competition is not continually changing the regulations every few years, which is what's been happening lately.
Is the fact that was asked by my wife to ask you this. Is the fact that you've not been hands-on with Red Bull since April got any connection with the fact that Red Bull hasn't done as well as it was doing since April? Because the world's saying this, you know.
Yeah, I had a suspicion they might be, or I have heard it. I have to be honest. I don't really read the press for kind of personal reason, going back to my Lacing House days. But the reality is I can't comment. I really can't comment, because once you're out, or once I'm out, I'm out. Yeah. And so that means I haven't been able to contribute to the development of the car since April. But why the team has been less competitive recently, I don't know, because I'm not involved.
Talking about variety in competition, you were at Goodwood all weekend, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
So Goodwood revival for the 3 days. You raced your GT40 and then your E-Type.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit. The reason for referring to it is because we saw, meeting minis beating Ford Galaxies in the wet, didn't we? That's the ultimate variety to me.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's. I think you look back to the 60s and 70s and the sheer variety of cars, often resulting in as race cars, relatively similar lap times, because that probably can't happen again in truth, because I think it must have been an absolutely fascinating area to work in, but teams had little or nothing in the way of research tools. Yeah. So
no data loggers and so on.
Well, not go back even further than that. Wind tunnels, if they were used at all, but used sparingly. Yeah. There's certainly no CFD, which is computational fluid dynamics, so virtual aerodynamics. Yeah. You didn't have all the vehicle dynamics simulation tools that we have now. You didn't have driver in the loop simulators, etc., etc. So for a designer, you were really going on gut feel and whatever more idea you had in the shower that morning. Whereas now,
does that give you more or less or something respect for the people who were successful in those days? Would you have liked to have a bash at it like that?
I'd have loved to have been involved in that time. I mean, you're obviously born where you're born, and it would have been very different. Yeah. So I'm not complaining at all. I've been very fortunate in the career I've had, in as much as when I started in 1980 out of uni, then wind tunnels were well established, but it was still before the computer age came of age. So other than the wind tunnel, you had really no simulation tools available to you at all. The rest was just gut feel. If you go back, as I say, to the 70s, most teams didn't even have a wind tunnel. So it was purely gut instinct, and you saw that quite often, particularly the ones that were pushing the boundaries more in terms of trying to innovate. So Jim Hall of Chaparral and Colin Chapman of Lotus. Then for every one that they got right, there'd be a few that got quietly put away in the corner as complete failures. And it must have been very frustrating, because expect that when they were failures, they didn't necessarily understand why.
No. But yesterday and the last couple of days, though, the thing that was on display was things like the extremes of braking different distances. You know, the Galaxy taking twice as long to stop as, or twice as far to stop.
Yeah.
The Mini, that kind of stuff really does mix it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the appeal for you? Is that why you're so active in this kind of racing?
No, it's not. I suppose I started racing into my 40s. I've done a few regularity rallies and stuff with my old pre-war Jaguar. Thoroughly enjoyed them, but just got a bit bored with regularity, which is basically average speed over a distance.
This is an SS100.
The SS100, exactly. So I just thought, and in those rallies often had as well as the regularity, they had a competitive section, so against the stopwatch. And I thought, okay, well that actually looks fun, let's have a go at that. And that then sort of started thinking about that, went down to the Goodwood Revival as a guest of Charles March, and watched the racing and thought, yeah, this actually looks really fun. And watched the race which the GT40's in, the Whitsun, and thought, well, actually that's a car which I could do both the race at Goodwood, for instance, do Classic Le Mans, and also do these long distance rallies. So that was really the thought behind it. I actually then, so that was 2003. So I bought the car, then snapped my Achilles, so I couldn't drive for a while. Then ran up, my Achilles and sort of mended itself. I rang Charles up again and said, yeah, I've now got this GT40, can I come and race it at the Revival? And he said, yes, of course, please ring my competition secretary. So gave me the number, rang him up. He said, yes, of course you can. What's your licence number? What licence number? I had I mean, it sounds ridiculous that, because I'd never been exposed to that side of it, that I had no idea that to drive a race car you needed a racing licence. So I then rang up Jodie Kidd, a friend. She said, there's this guy in the village that gave me my driving licence test, called Joe Macari. So I rang Joe up, and off I went on that adventure with doing the first few races under the watchful eye of Joe. And then actually you had to do 6 races, which is actually really 3 race weekends, because a lot of those club races had 2 races per weekend.
This was in the GT40?
No, this was in an ex-Ferrari challenge car.
Okay.
My 6th race was in the GT40, and it was the Le Mans Classic. So the first practice was actually a night session. So I remember setting off down the Muslan, and the previous group, plateau, whatever you call it, must have blown up and dropped oil. So there's concrete dust and rubbish everywhere, going off in the night in a GT40, thinking both simultaneously, this is absolutely amazing and this is properly terrifying. But anyway, yeah. So I think it was, in truth, it was a combination of midlife crisis, I suppose, and just I had a go-kart when I was a teenager. I only did 1 or 2 races in it, and for me always the fascination was trying to make it faster rather than my own driving. But having been involved in it for all this time, I thought it'd be quite fun to drive as well.
Sure. How does the E-Type fit into that?
So the GT,
because you have an E-Type as well, don't you?
Yes, that's right. So
did quite well in the TT on Sunday.
Yes, well, it wasn't our best result. We ended up 9th, I think.
Harry on pole.
Harry, my boy, he did a fantastic job and stuck it on pole. And then in the race we had a load of problems. Goodwood have gone to synthetic fuel, which is great in principle. But the reality is, while everybody likes to advertise that synthetic fuels just tip in instead of your normal petrol, the reality is that's not the case. You really need to retune your engine It does give problems, and certainly with.
Is the bang as big?
Hmm?
Is the bang, is the power the same? Or?
The power's very similar, yeah. Power's very similar, but you have to remap, well, not map, but change your jets or whatever if you're carburettor, and if you are my E-Type's mechanical fuel injection, the old Lucas system. So you have to try to reshim that a little bit, but then, so we did that, which is a day on the rolling road, but okay, fair enough. But then it's apparently, what we didn't realise is, well, what it did in the race is it gummed up the injectors, so 2 of the 6 injectors started leaking and just dripping, jammed open effectively. So 2 of the cylinders were running hopelessly rich, and it's just calm as a dog from more or less the start. Very difficult to drive because it would have nothing on the power, and then finally,
It works. Yeah.
Finally the engine would clear itself and get a load of wheel spin. So in the wet, it was not much fun at all.
But 9th, nevertheless.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing was I really enjoyed the race in the GT40 on Saturday, and there was one moment in the race where I had a problem, so I dropped about in Lavant, the corner onto the back straight, the engine cut. I think it's probably my own fault. I think I tried a higher gear and the engine bogged, and then it just wouldn't get going again, and so I lost about 5 places. Got going again, and there was a fantastic moment then where I came up between the other 3 GT40s in the race, and we were all lying astern going off down the Lavant.
But no, I'm hoping somebody photographed that.
I hope they did, yeah.
You passed them, didn't you?
I did pass them, yeah.
Preferably with you in front.
Yes, indeed.
The one thing I was going to ask you about the driving is, does this inform you about drivers? One of the things one reads about you is that you really like working with, or you respect the skill of the best drivers. Yeah.
I think, has my racing helped me with my day job? I think the answer is yes, because for various reasons. One of my jobs, if you like, is to try to talk to the drivers and with the race engineers and try to translate what they're describing into an engineering solution or solutions. And sometimes that, particularly with the Finnish drivers, then that takes a bit of dragging out of. You have to translate what they're saying and put it into an engineering terms. So I think it helps on that. You just have a feel for what they're describing better and what might be causing that. I think the other thing it helps me with is to an extent understanding the pressures that they face, and how they need to manage their time and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Do you find after all this time of watching the very best, you've worked with the very best, you've helped to deliver championships with these people. Does it still amaze you what they can do, or are you used to it? You expect Max Verstappen to do what he does.
No, sometimes you do. The true greats. Then you look at what they're doing and you think that is pretty bloody impressive. I think what I find most impressive about the top drivers is the amount they have left in terms of mental processing power left over. Their ability to be driving this car flat out and still be able to think about what the car's doing, what they should try to change. If they're not sure which switch position they should adopt, then they radio in and get the advice from the pit wall. And how to read the race, when to push, when to hold back on the tyres, when to push. Most of the time, Max, and I think it's true for some of the others, Fernando, Lewis, no doubt, you don't even need to tell them who's boxed and who's going who's a threat on the different strategy or whatever, they all know, right? They've already worked it out. They've been watching the big
screen.
diamond vision screens. They've seen it, and they know it. Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
Give us a top three. I know everybody does this to you, but give us the greatest drivers.
I can't. I think it would be wholly unfair of me to list the drivers in order, because that would mean also effectively, because I've been lucky enough to work with some of the true greats, to rank those drivers in order. But also I think it can be quite subjective, because particularly if you kind of compare across eras, to me, kind of comparing Fangio to Ayrton, say, and it's like comparing a Spitfire pilot to an F15 pilot.
Yeah,
how do you do it?
Yeah. Sure. I think, just as an aside, I'd say they probably rate you pretty high.
Maybe. I'm very flattered if they do.
Matt and I read the book, didn't we?
We did. You were described by somebody in it as the most competitive person they knew. Were you aware how competitive you are? What did you think? If you
Yeah. Well, that was Frank Williams. I think it must have been 91 or 92. 91 probably. And I didn't know how to take it when he said it initially. I was almost slightly sort of, okay. Because he said, yes, of all the people in the pit lane, he thought I was the most competitive. And I think actually when I kind of then reflected on it over months, really. And I don't know if he was right or not, I can't comment on that. But what I can't dispute is that the observation that I'm competitive is correct in my job. I'm not overly competitive in hobbies or things, just a game of tennis or whatever, then I'm not like some of the drivers. I don't get obsessed by also winning the tennis match. I like to try to, if I'm doing my hobby racing, I like to feel as if I've driven well to within my own ability. So if like say in the race on Saturday in the GT40, I felt that within my limitations I drove quite well. I'm not saying in any sense that would compare to how professional driver or even the top amateurs would do. I'm just saying I felt as if I've driven a good race. But so I don't feel overly competitive in those off things. But yes, when it comes to work, as mentioned then, kind of from very young age, my interest became racing cars and how to make those cars go quicker. And so my professional career has really been a passion for trying to make the car as fast as possible. I have a reputation for being an aerodynamicist, and it is true that I spend more time working on the aerodynamics than any other of the three disciplines within racing or within the engineering team. So both at my drawing board and working with my colleague aerodynamicists. But that's purely because over the years the aerodynamics has been the single biggest performance differentiator, but I also hugely enjoy the mechanical design aspect and the vehicle dynamics and race engineering aspects as well. They kind of tend to be rolled into one typically.
Do you think aerodynamics, probably from a road perspective too, was and maybe remains underrated? What I'm struck by reading the book is how often you had to go somewhere else to use a wind tunnel, and it was small, it might have wood underneath the bow. I wonder if there are enough wind tunnels in the world where the CFD is good enough to replicate everything.
I think the first point, do I think road car automotive manufacturers underestimate aerodynamics? Yes, absolutely. As we mentioned right at the start of the podcast, all this sort of save the planet, which is absolutely right. I have no thoroughly support that bit. But the biggest single thing there is energy consumption, and of course, biggest consumer of typically is the aerodynamic drag of the car. So that means make it smaller frontal area, and a better shape. And it just seems like the stylist wins every time in that battle, which is wrong. Obviously, the utopia is trying to come out of the car that's very aerodynamically efficient, but also looks good. Looks good is subjective. That's what we've tried to do with 17. We're not concentrating as heavily on minimum drag as you would do on a road car, but we're just concentrating on the downforce to drag ratio. But I think if you look at some of the iconic engineering objects, so let's take three. Let's take Concorde, Spitfire, and the Bluebird record car from the mid to late 60s. Then those to me are three beautiful objects, iconic. None of those were styled by stylists. They're all driven by engineers and aerodynamicists, and I think we just need to sort of reset a bit on the sort of form follows function rather than form follows stylist.
Yeah, interesting. I'm interested in I've read somewhere else your interest in the Donald Campbell Bluebird.
Mm-hmm.
That it is an amazing thing. I never realised that you were quite as close to it as you were.
Well,
is that the childhood?
Close in appreciation, not physically close in any way.
But in appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think motor racing is now very different because now the teams are big and they're big organisations. You know, I think most Formula One teams now will have 250 or more engineers. If you go back to really through to the early 90s, well, 1990, Leighton House, we've still kind of occasionally threatened for a win. We were literally 5 engineers, that was it. Go back into the 70s, it would have been a fraction less again. So it was a very small industry, and when you got a bunch of properly trained aircraft engineers to do a car, which is what Bluebird was, then it had a different mindset. They really thought about and researched and executed that car in a level which was well above what race teams were doing at the time.
Yeah, interesting. Beautiful car.
Sure. Stunning. First car really properly used ground effect.
Was it?
Yeah, it had a Venturi shape underneath, if you looked at it in side view. They weren't trying to create downforce, they just wanted neutral buoyancy, which if you have a flat bottom car, of course, you'll always have lift.
Yeah.
So they
just to avoid.
Yeah, and they would tune the rear ride height by sort of 3 millimetres or so at a time until they measured neutral buoyancy.
Interesting. We've had quite a lot of your time, but could you just we both were talking about the book. We were talking about it before the pod started, and you were explaining why I regard it as a unique book because you wrote it, but also because although it purports to tell about 10 racing cars, it's also full of interesting personal snippets, like your pay negotiations with people, and a certain amount about your sort of marital affairs and marital ups and downs.
Yeah, ups and downs. Yeah.
And I'm intrigued by that. Did you just decide on a big download? Because it's a unique collection of technology and personal stuff.
Effectively, yes, that's exactly what happened. So Jack Fogg from HarperCollins, the publishers, approached me and said, I've been approached over the years a few times on would I write a book, and has always said no. And then Jack Fogg approached and said, would you do a book where you choose 10 cars that you've been involved in and write about the story behind them? I thought, okay, well, that sounds quite interesting. I said, I'm a bit short on time, so I'd like to work with a ghostwriter. And who we chose, and I wanted somebody who knew absolutely nothing about motor racing, because I wanted him to force me to explain things if I slipped into jargon. So I worked with this chap Andrew Holmes, and we got on very well. We just sat there, him with his microphone running. He then turned my ramblings into some sort of logical order, and it went from there. But initially it was going to be 10 cars, and that's why the chapters are labelled those 10 cars. But as I started to get into it, I thought, you know what, I'm never going to get around to writing another book, so let's just chuck everything at it. So I tried to incorporate kind of my own family, or personal side of it. The kind of try to explain in as simply as I could some of the aerodynamic principles behind racing car design that hopefully laymen, if they read it once or twice, could understand. And then obviously about the cars and the characters and the drivers and the fellows that I've worked with, been lucky to work with over the years. So yes, you're absolutely right. In many ways, it was just a complete download there of everything.
Well, it's unique. It's unique. It's just that, but the thing that I took out of it is how much the creation of racing cars and winning is how closely it's associated with somebody's personal life.
Yeah, I think when I was 1988, then life was going very well. I'd been in charge of the design team for the first Leyton house. The car was radically different to anything else in Formula One at the time. So we concentrated really on basis on my own IndyCar background, concentrated very hard on aerodynamic efficiency, also knowing that we had a normally aspirated engine when all the top teams had turbos and probably going to be 100 horsepower up on us. And so we came up with these various concepts, so exploited the fact that the flat bottom regulation only extended to the back edge of the front wheels. So let's go for a raised chassis underside forward of that. V-shaped the chassis so that raised underside didn't present a forward-facing lifting component, if you like. Try to integrate that with the front wing so that the front wing worked across the whole span rather than being divided by the nose in the middle. Try to control the tip structures by going to curved end plates that came inside the front wheels. Worked hard on the diffuser, so I went for this arched diffuser to divide the structures up at the back of the car. Just really concentrated, and I don't know what other people's numbers are, but the first model we ran, if I remember well, had a downforce to drag ratio of around 2, and that was sort of roughly a copy of the cars from 1987. Most of them didn't change much for 88. We eventually got to about 3, so we sort of took quite a big step in the efficiency, and that allowed the car to kind of, once we got it sorted, it took us half a season to get it sorted. Once we got it working properly, then it became a very quick car. Only normally aspirated car to lead a lap that year, and
and I've got a model of that car. That was a really good looking car designed by an engineer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they're pretty cars. I think the regulations allowed nicely proportioned cars at the time. They're quite simple and elegant, and the sort of length of tyre size to width of the car to length of the car was about right. But anyway, back to your thing about personal and professional. Then 89, it was kind of I made a mistake, frankly. the 89 car was an overly ambitious design mechanically for the size of the team that we were. I think if I designed that car from a mechanical side at McLaren or Williams, they would have had the resources to cope with it, but us at Leighton House, with 5 of us, who didn't. So the car was very unreliable. And then it had a aerodynamic stability problem, which I just didn't understand. And because the numbers in the tunnel, I think we then made another jump to about 3.5 downforce to drag. But the car was just unstable, and it took a long time to understand that. In the end, finally identified it as the platen, which is a sort of moving ground. It's like a conveyor belt, a moving ground, and it was on a aluminium plate. But underneath the aluminium plate was an oak substructure, and that oak substructure had over the winter.
Matt was talking about.
It had warped, and so now the oak substructure was kind of that shape. So if all the races were through Eau Rouge, then we'd have been fine, but unfortunately they weren't. So eventually kind of sussed that somewhere around March of 1990. And then all it needed was a new diffuser, which we had ready for Ricard, but by that time Leighton House had gone wrong. But sorry to get back to the personal point, I'm getting lost again. Then 89 and so was really difficult at work, and at the same time at home with my first wife, then things were going very badly, and I'd noticed it over the years. Whenever work went badly, then home life, personal life seemed to go badly, and vice versa. I honestly don't know which, it's one of those chicken and egg type situations, but that was the fact. Then fast forward to, unfortunately, when my second marriage fell apart in kind of latter part of 2009 and into early part of 2010. Then that time I managed to turn I managed to isolate personal life from professional, and actually indeed professional life became my sanctitude. That when I came into work and turned to face the drawing board, by then I'd developed this ability to kind of differentiate, and so I could really have tunnel vision and kind of turn and face the drawing board, shut all the SH1T out, and get on with the job. And I think that was actually quite, as a sort of personal development, I hate the word, but it's quite a realisation for me that I was now able to achieve that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I suppose well, anybody that hasn't read the book should.
Thank you.
That knock on the door suggests probably take a lot of your time. The book is How to Build a Car.
Indeed.
Very entertaining. Adrian Newey, in the office with your drawing board, which is excellent to see. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you.